Ukraine's grain exports have picked up, with another 2 ships departing from Black Sea ports today under a United Nations-backed deal. More than 500,000 tons of grains have left Ukraine in less than a month. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has watched those shipments leave firsthand at the Joint Coordination Center, where Ukrainian, Russian, Turkish and UN officials are monitoring the deal. Guterres said many more shipments of Ukrainian grain are needed to help boost global supply, but he also said Russia had to step up its own exports of fertilizer and food products to bring down prices. Russia blockaded Ukrainian ports during the first months of its invasion. And at a news conference in Istanbul, the UN chief reminded that the other part of the UN brokered deal concerned Russian food products.
The other part of this package deal is the unimpeded access to the global markets of Russian food and fertilizer, which are not subject to sanctions. It is important that all governments and the private sector cooperate, bringing them to market. Without fertilizer in 2022, there may not be enough food in 2023.
Let's bring in DW correspondent Yulia Han, who is in Istanbul and was at that press conference. Yulia, tell us more about that soundbite we just heard. It's interesting that Guterres focused on the Russian side of the deal.
Well, because this is actually part of the bigger deal that Russia would also be allowed to export its own grain and fertilizer to world markets without sanctions. And I think there are still concerns or fears even that Russia might sabotage the entire deal or end the entire grain deal if it has the impression that this part of the agreement is not being honored. Now, Mr. Guterres came to Istanbul today to see it firsthand how this so-called grain deal is being implemented. Let's remember he was in Odessa yesterday at this key Ukrainian port where he saw ships being loaded with grain, and today he again said how deeply moving that was for him to see. He also said that more than 560,000 metric tons of grain and other agricultural products have been shipped out of Ukrainian ports since early August under this deal to world markets. But he also said, as we just heard, that more needs to be done because let's remember millions of tons of grain are still inside Ukraine waiting to be exported to places around the world that urgently need the grain.
Now, this is a deal between Ukraine and Russia, but you're in Turkey. Can you give us a little more insight about the role that the country there is playing?
Well, the Turkish government helped the United Nations broker this agreement. It is the only significant agreement reached between Moscow and Kiev, signed by both parties since Russia invaded the country in late February. The Turkish government, since the beginning of the Russian invasion, has performed a balancing act where it, on the one hand, supports Ukraine militarily as well with combat drones, but it's also trying not to antagonize Russia. And it has maneuvered itself by doing this into the role of a key mediator in this crisis. And now if we look at the practical side of things, vessels that are coming from Ukraine loaded with grain and vessels that are going to Ukraine are being inspected here in Turkish waters by teams consisting of representatives from both Ukraine and Russia, but also from the United Nations and Turkey. So Turkey is involved in that process as well. So it is a very crucial part of that agreement, and Mr. Guterres, the UN Secretary-General, today thanked the Turkish government for what he said it's a pivotal role in this whole process.
And Guterres has also mentioned that while this is a good start, it's by no means the end of these kinds of grain shipments, that there's still a problem out there. Can you tell us more about how this deal, the role it plays in alleviating hunger and food prices?
Well, the UN Secretary-General at least said yesterday that there has already been a meaningful decrease in prices of foodstuffs around the world. I guess more time is needed to really come up with a proper assessment there, but he is basically selling that as a message of hope. But yes, the Ukrainian government has a huge interest in speeding this process up. They actually want at least 5 vessels to leave Ukrainian ports per day, and the United Nations also have an interest. They said they would try to step up the grain exports as we are headed towards winter.
All right, DW correspondent Julia Hahn there for us in Istanbul. Thanks very much.